There is a solution other than cyanide to what the elite consider excess population. Why not prevent the poor, for the sake of argument? Let us venture a conservative 99% of the world's population from having children altogether. Or if that isn't possible, at least vastly slow their birth rates. Eugenics is a term coined in the latter part of the 19th century by Englishman Francis Galton to describe the quote-unquote science of bettering human stock and the elimination of unwanted characteristics and individuals. Galton proposed societal intervention for the furtherance of, quote, racial quality, end quote, maintaining that, quote, Jews are specialized for a parasitical existence upon other nations, end quote, and that, quote, except by sterilization, I cannot yet see any way of checking the produce of the unfit who are allowed their liberty and are below the reach of moral control, end quote. It's from chapter 11, The Depopulation Bomb, in Jim Keith's book, Casebook on Alternative 3. This is an Illuminate book. Very good book. Highly recommended. Thank you. Welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth. I want to talk about a few things, for which I'm going to need a couple of notes here. First, I just want to mention very briefly, as I talked to you before about nationalizing the Federal Reserve. And while it is an extremely drastic measure, and certainly there would be a lot of opposition to this from the Federal Reserve, from banks, from international finance and everything. But all of these fucking entities are our enemies, okay? In the context of fucking debt, let's look at it, okay? In the context of debt itself. If we were to nationalize the Federal Reserve, the government would hold and put this underneath the Treasury Department and then have the Treasury, through Congress, issue money in the form of credit, not debt. But if we were to nationalize the Federal Reserve, almost 50% of our total United States debt, which is somewhere around $13 trillion, would be held by the government. In other words, they would retake all of the treasuries that were bought by the Federal Reserve, and thus they would hold that debt. It would be meaningless. Okay? Yes, there would be ramifications, but of course there would be ramifications for any drastic change to the system. Okay? So if you want to look at it from a debt perspective, it makes sense to nationalize the Federal fucking Reserve and put it out of business for good. No more issuing of debt. Period. Okay? So if you want to look at it from a debt perspective, it still makes sense. In fact, it makes even more sense to do it that way. But I propose we go further. And as I have stated to you before, I'm no fan of this fucking government, this administration, or anybody in it, because it's completely run by fucking Wall Street, banks, and finance houses. Okay? But the fact remains that we're dealing with an enemy that is so entrenched, so wealthy, and so fucking powerful that the only thing that can confront that entity is national governments. And that's why it's important for us to try and retake our government by the means that are open to us, and you can interpret that whatever way you wish. Because our government is the only force that can go against them. You understand? That's why there is a need to retake and reclaim our administration, the leadership of our country. Okay? So, let's go a step fucking further and say, not only nationalize the Federal Reserve, let's nationalize all of the motherfucking banks in this country. Because that will take another percentage of our national debt. Okay? If you want to still do business internationally, this will not affect anything we owe to China, Japan, anybody else. You know, they would still hold the debt that they do against us, and we could conduct international business, but we would eliminate probably, let's see, almost banks, Oh, and insurance companies. Let us nationalize the fucking insurance companies. That way you can eliminate the entire fucking problem of Obama's healthcare fucking reform. Nationalize the health insurance industries, put them under the auspices of the federal government. And you're looking at, with the Fed and government accounts, $6.6 trillion. Banks, $2.4 trillion. Insurance companies, $1.2 trillion of U.S. debt. That gets us, let's see, 8, 9, $10.2 trillion. And that leaves about $3 trillion outstanding to foreign sources and various other, pension things and what have you. Okay, so it makes sense from a debt perspective as well. Nationalize the Federal Reserve and all national banks in this motherfucking country. Tell them to stick their debt up their fucking asses. Now, the main topic that I wanted to talk about was former Alaska Senator Ted Stevens dying in a plane crash. And a former NASA head who was injured in this flight as well, along with some other people. It just boggles my mind every time I see some high-profile individual dying in a plane crash, because planes, we're told, are supposed to be the safest form of transportation because, car accidents claim so many lives per year. But if you look at the number of prominent political people who have died in plane crashes, I'm sorry, I don't know statistics, but I'm sure if somebody did the fucking statistics on this and looked at the number of high-profile people who have died in plane crashes compared to, any other way of dying, I'm sure it's an astronomical sum against that many high-profile people dying in plane crashes. Okay, so I'm going to give you a list, and I'm going to talk about this briefly. Okay, the most notorious in Alaska again was Nick Begich, a former senator, and Hale Boggs, a very prominent member of the House of Representatives, who are presumably dead. Of course, their plane was never found. Their bodies were never recovered. Nobody knows what happened to them, supposedly. Some other people that have died in plane crashes. Paul Wellstone. A lot of you might remember that particular one. Mel Carnahan, another one. Ron Brown, very suspicious there as well. JFK Jr., another one who may have been a prominent figure in politics had he lived. Senator John Tower, another big name from years gone by. Astronaut Manley Carter. John Hines, another one. Joe Kennedy Jr., well, that was in World War II, but still a plane crash. And Dorothy Hunt during the Watergate scandal period. She was the wife of E. Howard Hunt, the notorious spook. So I want to thank user Shub Nagarath, who pointed some of this information out to me about Ted Stevens being connected to HAARP. And I want to point you to the EU Times, which I think is an online newspaper, which, it's probably a conspiracy publication, what have you, but they have a story in which they purport that the Soviet Union had investigated the death of Ted Stevens, and that they had found evidence that Ted Stevens was investigating the death of somebody in a plane crash that was supposedly connected to the activities of HAARP. Now, HAARP, that's the High Altitude Active Auroral Research Project, okay? And while Ted Stevens initially was a big backer of HAARP, that perhaps he had found out the nefarious activities of HAARP and was going to be a whistleblower in this regard, and he was put out of commission because he represented a threat to what was going on there. Now, of course, the Soviets and some other people through various means have suggested, and of course others as well, has suggested that HAARP is part of an arsenal of weather modification weapons that the United States possesses. And they go on in this EU Times article to say that Obama has basically let the genie out of the bottle here in this administration, but I would aver that he has absolutely nothing to do with it. If what's going on, it would be the shadow government that is doing this. In other words, that the United States has unleashed the full fury of their weather modification warfare techniques to bring upon the floods in Pakistan, various earthquakes around the world, the sweltering heat, the heat wave that we're going through, various other things being attributed to this weather warfare scenario to, you know, some ultimately nefarious purpose. But, you know, there are a lot of other things associated with HAARP as well. You know, over-the-horizon radar, the ionospheric heating acting as a lens to help with communications, and then there are also mind control allegations as well. The fact is, we really don't know a lot about what's going on with HAARP, and the fact that there are people who are, you know, looking into this supposedly, and there are a lot of people who are, you know, have serious questions about what's going on with HAARP, and it's entirely plausible in my mind that Ted Stevens may have come to a realization that HAARP was something other than what it was purported to be. And, you know, when people are disgruntled, and let's face it, Ted Stevens had lost a very close race to be reelected in Alaska. And probably was disgruntled at the establishment. And if, you know, if he had an avenue by which he could work something out, you know, by uncovering some, you know, big conspiracy or whatever, it seems highly likely that he would have done it, you know, timing-wise. So these are things to think about, you know. I think they've gone to the well one too many times in offing people through, you know, accidental plane crashes. Okay? I think they've done it one too many times. And this may be another example right here of doing something right in front of your face and saying, yeah, look, we kill people by making their planes go down. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to say? You're just a conspiracy theorist. You know, there's nothing to this. This was just a sad, terrible accident. But if you look at it, you know, from a statistical point of view, there's something really fucked up about it. And there's something more to it. And it's entirely plausible. I'm not saying it is the case, but it's entirely plausible that Ted Stevens was murdered. And that he was murdered because he was on the verge of uncovering something having to do with HAARP or something else. But, you know, there could be a connection there. So just some food for thought. Thank you. Good day.